Hi, everyone. My name is Jericho Perez. I'm a board of director with the National Hispanic Cannabis Council, and I'm also on the legal committee. Today, we're hosting our NHCC Legal Committee Forum, our roundtable that we do monthly. I'm excited to be here with some of my fellow legal committee members, Jennifer Cabrera, counsel with Vicente Cederberg, as well as Julian Montero, who is hopefully incoming to the call. He's having some technical issues, but an attorney with Stahl, Ewing, Arnstein, and Lair. I'm also a partner with Vicente Cederberg. I head our national licensing and merit licensing group with Brian Vicente. Today, we're actually going to be talking about social equity opportunities and what that means for cannabis licensing across the U.S. It's something that's becoming, fortunately, more popular among new states, new cities, and jurisdictions that are coming online, and even those that have had programs for quite a while. It looks like we do have Julian on now. Julian, are you with us? All right. Well, might be still having some technical difficulties, but one of the things I wanted to start with before we get into specifics about opportunities in jurisdictions, whether they be local or state across the U.S., I wanted to talk about some of the larger issues, the umbrella issues we're seeing with some of these social equity programs. We'll also talk about the benefits because there are obviously benefits. But one of the main programs right now everyone's discussing is New York. And New York's got a robust adult use program coming online. They're really pushing this social equity initiative hard in that program. Jennifer Cabrera is counsel in our New York office, so New York, New Jersey office. So I want to give Jen the opportunity to discuss that program, what the state's doing, and what those opportunities look like.
Thanks, Jericho. Hello, everyone. I want to apologize in advance. So my furnace died about an hour ago, and I'm waiting for people to come fix it. So if I get a call in the middle of this webinar, I may need to hop. So I apologize in advance, but I'm here now and cold, and I can talk a bit about New York. So New York has a very exciting program that is not fully fleshed out yet. The state legalized adult use in March of last year, 2021. Took a while for regulators to be appointed, but they were finally appointed in the latter half of last year. And we got a Cannabis Control Board and Office of Cannabis Management. Those are the names of the two regulatory agencies that are really committed to social equity. Like, this is clearly a priority of theirs. Social equity obviously is an undefined term in many cases, and it is an undefined term in New York as well. There are some definitions in the law, but they're not that clear. It's something that the regulators need to put meat on the bones of the skeleton of that term. So the regulators have been appointed. They voiced their commitment to equity, but they haven't issued regulations yet. Those are going to be coming in a few months, probably April or May of this year. But the really exciting news that's made headlines is that New York is trying to tackle one of the main issues that you have with social equity programs across the country, namely that if you're trying to have ensure that cannabis is inclusive and that Black and brown people in particular, women as well, are represented, how do you make sure these folks are able to participate in an industry that requires a massive upfront capital expenditure if they don't have access to funds? That is the classic problem. Like, across the river in New Jersey, there is a hefty social equity program where this New Jersey Commission is really prioritizing giving out licenses to minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses. All great, and they have a very complicated system of priority to ensure that these groups get a certain number of licenses. But giving them priority is not the same thing as making it accessible, because no matter what, if you don't have the money to pay Vicente Cederberg or one of the many other firms, because frankly, we're not that expensive in comparison, to write your application and bring in your contractor and your architect and your civil engineer and your lobbyist and your builder. Like, there's so many expenses with this, and then getting your supply. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, not even counting your build out and like supply. it's over $1 million if you're looking at cultivation. How do you do that? You don't do it easily as a family-owned business. So long story short, New York has come up with an innovative system where they've created a fund to fund these groups. And they brought onto their cannabis control board someone from the Dormitory Authority of New York. It's called DASNY. And DASNY is one of those state organizations that those of us who've lived their whole, like myself, lived my whole life pretty much in this area, and I've never once heard of it. It's like the Port Authority, but dormitories. Apparently they are used for bond issuances. And DASNY is putting out they're raising a $250 million fund to support social equity businesses. And that'll be done through a bond raise, and it'll be funded over time with the income from tax receipts and also the fees that they're collecting from these businesses. And that fund will be used to make loans and provide facility space, rental space to some social equity dispensaries. And the number I'm hearing most recently is 150 social equity dispensaries that will be the fortunate recipients of these loans, and more likely that DASNY will be the landlord to them. So you'll have effectively rent-free or low rent accommodation for your dispensary. They're also looking to create a mentorship program, partnering these groups with established operators. So we have to see how it plays out. This was all just announced in the last few weeks, but it's kind of novel to see New York doing this. Like Jericho, I think Julian is having all sorts of trouble, but Jericho, are we seeing anything like this?
I'm on, actually.
Oh, hi, Julian. You
Jennifer. Thank you so much. I do apologize, but I'm on by telephone, and I agree wholeheartedly, Jennifer, with your remarks associated with the fact that these social equity programs, although laudable and certainly needed, address only part of the issue. And the bigger issues, I think, that you've well described is really the access to capital. This is a capital-intensive business. It is rapidly becoming consolidated by very large players. And I think in addition to what you've mentioned, Jennifer, New York is implementing or has implemented a program in their social equity legislation that will require the minority business owner to retain operating, financial, and legal control, is how they generally describe it. Other states haven't really done that. And I think that will help address the ongoing concern that if you are a minority business owner and you have a license and you do not have access to adequate capital, well, you may find a partner that will finance you. And then slowly but surely, you may find yourself with little of the economic benefit, whether it be they're providing you with the physical premises through expensive lease agreements, whether it's a management agreement or some type of IP agreement. We've all seen this in the industry. And so I think the point is to be mindful that social equity programs are necessary, but there needs to be further awareness of how we're going to provide capital. Without providing this capital, we're, in my opinion, going to continue to see woefully low numbers of ownership by racial and ethnic minorities.
Right. And on that point, Jen, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, and we may not know yet, how do social equity businesses qualify for the program? You know, Julian just mentioned that there's this financial and control aspect in the legislation, which I assume means, you know, you're receiving a majority percentage of the profits from the business, as well as voting control, all of those things. But it takes a lot of resources for the department and the regulating agency to stay on top of monitoring all that, right? That there's not side agreements and controls not changing hands after the fact. And then, of course, just vetting those applications and those applicants when they first come in. What does the qualification process look like? Do we know?
We don't know yet. There are some specifications in the law relating to past cannabis convictions or income thresholds, but there also, the law talks about prioritizing minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses and disadvantaged farmers. So there are a slew of criteria they could choose from. The expectation, though, is that they are going to focus on legacy operators. So I don't know if it's going to be limited to that, but New York is, the regulators and also the activist community has really embraced the legacy to legal transition. And they're trying to make this happen, because we have to keep in mind that New York City is the biggest cannabis market in the world. And it's illegal. There's just so much weed sold and consumed around here, and it has been for years. And so there's a desire to not completely destroy the wealth that's already there and build on top of it, but rather to allow some transition.
Right. Yeah, which makes sense, because a lot of the people who have been operating in this black market or gray area are the people, the Black and brown community, right? And then to take that away from them and move it into majority rich white businesses, that creates a problem. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do with these social equity programs. You mentioned New Jersey. I'd love to hear a little bit more now that Jersey is, at least applications are rolling in New Jersey. I don't know that we've seen approvals yet for the new businesses, but can you talk a little bit about what that social equity program looks like, what the opportunities are there, at least when we finally start seeing approvals?
Yeah, of course. So New Jersey, yeah, we haven't had any approvals yet, but that we should start to see approvals as early as next month for some of the cultivation and manufacturing applications that went in back in December. And then next month also, the state will start accepting applications for retailers. There are going to be further applications down the road. And also, it's not like New Jersey's window for these applications isn't closing. There's no closing date set yet. So it'll continue to happen. But either way, New Jersey has prioritized diversely owned businesses, which means if you've received a certification from the state as a minority, woman, or veteran-owned business, that gets you higher priority. Also, if you are a social equity applicant, which is defined as someone with a past cannabis conviction, or if you are at, I believe, less than 70% of the state mean income. Oh, it's not mean income, it's probably average income. Either way, a lower income person, I believe below $60,000 a year, plus living in certain economically disadvantaged areas. So it's a limited group of folks that qualify, but those who do really are at top of the heap. So we are going to see, as you see in so many states, companies find a way to structure themselves to fit into these criteria, because most business people have a mother or a sister or a wife or a daughter or some friend who is a minority. You have these groups. Also, you have larger businesses that are minority owned. They're able to come in and take advantage of this. So it's good from the perspective of having that diversity of ownership, but it certainly isn't resulting in a diversity of the resources of who's coming in, and it's not resulting in necessarily a transition from legacy to legal. I know the state is prioritizing and they would like to help that happen, but without providing funding, it's hard to really smooth that along.
Right. And
Jennifer, a question on, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit of a delay here. I didn't mean to speak over you, but a question with respect to New Jersey. Are you seeing or have you heard of any efforts to try to provide some meaningful measures so that the minority business owner can in fact retain either economic or legal control in the business and not merely become a straw person for a well-capitalized group?
Yes, there are. So New Jersey's regulations are incredibly long and complex. I really like to joke in my nerdy lawyer way that the New Jersey regulations are like a jobs program for lawyers. It's just so incredibly complicated. And among those restrictions are a requirement that owners all owners need to enjoy the customary benefits of ownership and share in the profits and losses of the business. And the goal there is that gives the commission in New Jersey wide discretion to ensure that someone isn't being put at 51% as a figurehead, that they actually are going to share in profits and losses and have decision-making authority. There are also restrictions on if you're partnering with a management services contractor, like how much of your revenue can go to that management company. The management company is restricted from taking an ownership interest in your company. So New Jersey they've really learned from other states and the corporate structuring practices that are very common in our industry, and they're trying to circumvent it, or trying to put a stop to it.
Yeah, that's terrific. So would you say that there's a trend towards awareness of this particular issue of profits being stripped from the minority applicants? And would you think, and collectively here, that other states will follow to try to really provide some robust assurances that the minority applicant will in fact be able to share in the profits of this business?
I would say there is a trend in this section of the East Coast. New York and New Jersey have both followed that path. I would say that Massachusetts Commission is likewise very alert to control issues. Jericho, what are you finding in the rest of the country, not just this little corner of it?
So it's interesting. We're seeing a lot of movement in the South right now. At North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, possibly Texas with new medical in the near future. And in a lot of those, we're not even seeing social equity programs, at least at this point. I mean, we're just looking at legislation right now, right? For example, North Carolina, but there's no social equity aspect that I'm aware of to that law. In Texas, there's no social equity aspect right now. As far as the medical law goes, for the very limited amount of operators that do exist. And I don't know if there are plans for social equity programs if they are going to give out new licenses. It does not seem like there's going to be. So there's definitely a spectrum of commitment to social equity. And then even on the social equity spectrum, what are the regulators willing to do to make sure the benefits are actually being realized by the community and the applicants that should be realizing it. Alabama is a state that is going to implement a social equity program. It is in the law. We don't have regulations yet, so we don't really know what that's going to look like for qualifications and control and how the department is going to check applicants on that. Right now, it's really, we're giving 12 licenses, we're giving 5 licenses, 20% of those have to go to minority-owned applicants that own 51% or more of the business. But again, Julian, it goes back to what you were saying, is there access to capital? That's something that's not in the law right now. That's not in the program. Will it be in the regulations? Probably not if it's not in the law. And then we have to move on to that control piece, right? Are they going to maintain actual voting control of the company, operational control, and financial control of the business? And I think what we've seen in some states too is in these social equity programs, regulators try and put in provisions into the law or into the rules that'll say something like, if you're a social equity applicant, you can't have any ownership changes within the first 3 years, within the first 5 years, within the first 2 years. But then there's been pushback from the social equity community too. I want to get one of these licenses and I do want to sell it. So there's limitations placed on those social equity applicants in that way, where states are trying to make a positive impact and do the right thing, but it can be detrimental to the community in that way. So we're seeing trends on both sides. I think that the West Coast in California, what we're seeing in LA and other areas, they are trying to really implement these social equity programs along that actually encompass like grant programs and loan programs to social equity applicants, which provide that access to capital that's so needed. That was a major issue in Illinois and is a major issue, right? With the delay of the program, social equity applicants, which were supposed to be priority, are suffering. They can't afford to keep going through this lawsuit that's been going on for 2 years. And a lot of them are having to drop out of the program entirely.
Well, I have a question here. If because it seems to me that access to capital is an overarching issue for any entrepreneur, not just in this business. And so if you're a would-be entrepreneur and you're eager to enter into the cannabis industry, I think first of all, the NHCC has tremendous resources to guide you. So the question is, let's look down the road and hope that we have federal legalization of the industry. Do you think then, with the ability to potentially obtain SBA loans, some of these social equity programs perhaps lose some of their luster or their need? Or how would you view the interrelation of now having a mechanism for ready capital and the ongoing need for social equity programs?
I would say that I think we're a few years out from SBA loans being available to the cannabis industry.
Without a doubt, it's something far in the future. But I guess the question is looking in a crystal ball and looking at this industry in the future as any other industry, where you have a small operator that would seek an SBA loan to try to get funding. How would you envision social equity programs in that environment? Again, it's a hypothetical.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's a great question. And it gets into a really complicated hypothetical situation, because if there are SBA loans, it means there's federal legalization. If there's federal legalization, it depends on how it's handled, but more than likely there's interstate commerce. So you don't, and that means then that all of the infrastructure investments that so many companies have made to put cultivation facilities in small states they're not going to be as valuable, because they're going to start moving probably most cannabis cultivation to the West Coast, which has conditions that are really well suited for it. And there's going to be a massive disruption in the industry. Also, a lot of state programs that protect residents like New Jersey requires a 5% owner that's a New Jersey resident. Other states, I think Missouri required ownership. A number of states have these requirements. Those will be considered unconstitutional because that interferes with interstate commerce. So I think social equity programs are going to be one of the things that fall by the wayside when federal legalization comes, because it's hard for states to have these unique programs and regulate their own industry in that way when you can have free movement. That's my pessimistic outlook.
That's a really interesting perspective.
And I think that's what makes these social equity programs so important now, right now, for these meaningful social equity programs to actually bring in social equity applicants and social equity operators now, so that they can get a footing in the industry. Because once we do have federal legalization, we're going to have operators in Colorado and Jersey and all over the US that have been operating for years, right? In some instances, decades. So how do we make sure those are social equity operators, and those are the operators that have the opportunities when we see federal legalization, right? We've got to make sure that happens now. Because when federal legalization happens, we have these big businesses right now, but we're really going to see a boom in non-marijuana big business entering the industry at that point.
I completely agree. It just makes it so important that these programs are taken advantage of now, because now is your shot to become an established player and try to survive that change.
Right. And that's one of the reasons NHCC, in our legal committee, we're really making a push for our members, organize a repository of social equity opportunities where our members can actually log on to the website and statewide see what social equity opportunities there are, what that licensing process looks like. Julian, do you want to talk a little bit more about that and the rollout of that in the very near future, hopefully?
Absolutely. And again, I'm sorry that I'm not able to join through video or share further screens, but the NHCC is compiling extremely valuable data so that a would-be entrepreneur will be able to identify the state in which they're interested in ultimately launching their operation, review general information associated with guidelines. For example, we mentioned potential residence requirements to the extent you have other partners that may not be within your state, and also an overview of some of the social equity programs and other licensing requirements. I understand it's going to be in a optically manageable format, so that if you're interested in selecting operations in New Jersey, you'll click on the state of New Jersey. It'll drop down to some information, and we're really excited about that. There's just a lot of developments in this industry, and you know, as Jennifer was indicating, what can happen in the future once we obtain federal legislation is a further reason why operators that are interested or would-be operators can benefit from becoming members of the NHCC and learning what's required so you can have a claim now and grow in the future.
Definitely. Yeah, we're really excited about that. There's been a lot of community help gathering all of this information and will be continually updated on the website. I'll give you an example. You know, Connecticut is currently coming online, right? Applications are open. They have a social equity program. We're not just limiting the information on the website to social equity programs. Generally will be licensing opportunities, but I'll use Connecticut as an example. You know, they're doing this lottery process, prioritizing social equity applicant lotteries, and we'll have the information for what qualifies an applicant as social equity in Connecticut, as well as the timeline for when that process starts. You might know right now, Connecticut is having rolling lotteries by priority for different license types, the social equity happening right now, and it's sort of a 90-day rolling time period. So you'll be able to access that information and then access the actual website where you can, the state website where you can go to gather that information, submit your application, all of those things. So that's really exciting. And on that note, Connecticut social equity program is pretty interesting. You've got to be 65% owned by an individual who qualifies as social equity as an entity to qualify for that program. And that's an average household income of less than 300% of the state median household income. So that's a pretty large percentage there, which I think is a good thing, and a resident of a disproportionately impacted area. We're seeing this disproportionately impacted area requirement quite a bit on the East Coast, I feel like, which is interesting. You have to be located in one of the state defined disproportionately impacted areas, or you have to be from one, right? So there's kind of two ways. Your business can be located there, or you can be a resident of one of those areas. And that's for 5 of the last 10 years, which is interesting. And then you'll have priority for a narrower lottery instead of a lottery that's open to the broader public, which is going to happen after the social equity lottery. And you've got an opportunity for a very limited cultivation license. Well, I say limited, but it's actually unlimited. It's limited to a small amount of people, but they're going to give multiple of those licenses. You do have to have a $3 million for the provisional license fee, which is interesting. So that is a program where, you know, if you want one of those unlimited cultivation licenses, we are seeing social equity applicants having to pair with groups that have access to an exorbitant amount of capital to reach that licensing fee, which will be interesting to see how many people we have actually go that way.
I have a general question here that I'd like to pose to both of you as subject matter experts here. Would you be able to pinpoint to data that shows that through social equity programs in various states, there has been an uptick in actual business owners that come from the, you know, identified backgrounds, whether they be racial, ethnic, veteran, or economic or otherwise? because I was trying to search that information in preparation for this, and I couldn't find anything. And I'm not sure if there is any data on whether or not these programs have actually been successful so far.
Yeah, we have our Director of Economics, Andrew Livingston, here at Vicente Cedarburg, has, I believe, put together some data on this. The difficult and unfortunate part of it is that even though we have programs like Colorado and California that have been around for years, the social equity programs are pretty new. So being able to pinpoint that data in a valuable way that says, it was more than just 200 social equity applicants and 50 of them received licenses, but how are they actually receiving financial benefit? Or have they been in the industry longer than 5 years now? Are they currently operating? I don't know that data exists, unfortunately. Jen, thoughts there?
No, I would say that in this part of the country, like, it's too new. There is no data because no one's really been awarded anything yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if, like, New York and New Jersey do release data if they find that it's favorable.
Right. And here in Colorado, I mean, we've had legalization for years, and we just implemented a social equity program in the past 24 months, and it's just now getting up and running. So that's how limited the data and short term it would be here.
Right, and I asked the question anticipating that to, again, at least from my perspective, hammer the point that states that want to make meaningful change really ought to focus on providing capital. I think unless and until there are mechanisms such as what I've heard New York is going to try to do with this general fund, floating a bond, I don't think the numbers are going to increase in any meaningful way. And I think the data right now is less than 2% of racial and ethnic minorities are in the cannabis industry as operators, owner-operators. Maybe I'm off, maybe it's 5%. So I guess the point is, from my perspective, these programs are great, they're necessary. But if you are trying to push for change and affect change through legislation, you ought to make an effort to reach out to the legislatures in whatever state you're in so that they understand that there needs to be more. There needs to be some mechanism to ensure ongoing control and participation in profits, and to think of creative ways to provide capital.
Right. And I think that places a lot of responsibility, necessary responsibility, on some of the larger operators in the industry, right, who have a lot of power on the lobbying level, but also a corporate social responsibility to assist in some of these newer states with making sure that if they are partnering with a social equity applicant, they're doing it in a legitimate way, right? Whether it be through these incubator programs we're seeing some of the larger businesses in the industry implement, or providing capital. And it's not just the actual licensees, but the law firms too, right? And other groups that play a big role in the licensing and the actual operational aspect of the marijuana industry. We have a pretty robust pro bono and limited bono program here at VS, where we are actively taking on licensees that are social equity applicants, or potential licensees that are social equity applicants. And I think that's an important part of this too. We all have to take a little responsibility in making sure the change and the outcomes we see or want to see are actually happening. And I think
that's a great point.
Go ahead.
To challenge the industry and our respective clients and stakeholders within the NHCC that are supporters to make this top and center. We see what is happening on some of the public boards where you will have to have a certain number of racial, ethnic, gender minorities on the boards. Well, that's a great example of how business can help effectuate change. And in this industry, I think that the big players that are well capitalized can certainly be agents of change, working together with legislators so that we can start seeing an increase in the number of minority and diverse owners and operators.
Right. And I think in the future, our hope with the legal committee too, one of our priorities is starting to bring regulators on to some of these roundtables, discuss, the social equity programs and opportunities with them, and conduct that outreach before a lot of these programs are implemented, and hopefully provide meaningful policy change and implementation so that we can see these outcomes that we're talking about here. I'll give credit where credit is due. There certainly are some jurisdictions that are really trying to implement this access to capital approach and ensuring there's control. We've seen some enforcement on that. LA has a grant program and a fee deferral program that is active now and working, and I'm hopeful we're going to see good data out of that. The West Coast, I think, is the West Coast and the East Coast are where we're going to first start seeing those changes happen, and then I do hope the South follows. Georgia's social equity program, their entire program is coming online in the very near future, hopefully with the lawsuits being resolved soon. But there were some social equity aspects to that program that it's not necessarily just the entity being licensed, but it branches out to ancillary companies as well, ensuring that you're working with MBE, WMBE, those are women-owned or minority-owned business vendors. So not necessarily plant touching, but the security companies, things like that. I think that's also a very valuable thing that the industry can do to support the social equity and disproportionately impacted community generally. And we're seeing more of that as well. So on the legal side, that's another part of these social equity programs and policy, in addition to expungement, right? That's a really important part of this. So it's not necessarily just licensing, but we do want to see expungement opportunities when we're seeing decriminalization happen on the state level, and especially when we're seeing licensing of businesses, regulated businesses on the state level. Any other questions or thoughts from the group or from anyone watching?
I think then, I would just give my parting thoughts that I think it's admirable that so many states are trying to have these programs in place, and these are regulators who are working within a brand new industry, and they are learning all of the time. And so I admire a lot of the states that have put these programs into place and that they're trying. So honestly, I applaud them for that. I think there are shortcomings, but I'm glad, especially heartened to see what New York is doing. I hope there's some success there.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think
agree.
that's right, and I share with that. Sorry. I would hope that I'm not sure if it's a trend or, the challenges to some of these programs. I hope that there is not a trend to challenge these programs. I hope that these programs are embraced in the manner, in the spirit in which they were enacted, and that is to really try to level the playing field for minority and diverse entrepreneurs that are interested in coming into this industry. So that would be my one hope. And then I think what is going to be really interesting to watch is what happens once we get to federal legalization, and what can be done at that level so that these programs don't go by the wayside, and that it doesn't become a free-for-all where the monsters continue to consolidate and control the industry and squeeze out people that would otherwise have had an opportunity through these programs.
Right. Yeah. And on that note of a trend of challenging these programs, I think we're seeing that when we're seeing limited licensing jurisdictions, right? Limited licensing regulatory schemes where we're only giving 5 cultivation licenses, and it's completely based on merit. And one of those licenses is reserved for a social equity applicant, right? That's where we're seeing a trend of challenging the entire program. The easiest way to do that is based on the social equity qualification, because somebody didn't get a license in the end and they have the capitalization to sue the state. The easiest way to do that is through a racially based challenge to the program, right? Which is unfortunate. So I think that's an important point to talk about when we're talking about this and these new programs is free market, unlimited licenses. Mississippi, for example, Oklahoma, Michigan, those are where you're not going to see the same trend for challenging the entire program. And hopefully you won't see the delay in the program like we're seeing in Illinois. So I think that's an important point, Julian. And on that note, for anybody trying to enter or hoping to enter the industry as a social equity applicant, I do want to reiterate it's so important that you have competent legal counsel representing you, especially when you're going in to partner with a company that's going to provide you capital or be your partner in operating one of these businesses, to make sure your interests are protected and that you're going to see the outcome and be able to operate the business like you want to. So that's so important. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out to the council, reach out to our firm. We're happy to help. But it's been great talking with you all. Any parting thoughts before we leave? Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much. Please do join us next month. If you're interested in becoming a member and leveraging all of the resources we just talked about as far as licensing and social equity opportunities, please do reach out to the council. Everybody have a great week, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.